Welcome. My name is Juntu Day. Before we begin, take a slow, deep breath. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a quiet story. A story that moves slowly, like a river through time. There are no sudden moments here. No noise, no rush, just a calm journey through forgotten places, silent memories, and gentle moments that help your mind rest. So find a comfortable position, close your eyes if you'd like, and let yourself drift. This is the quiet river of time. Let's begin. It began, as many stories do, with a river. Not a roaring river, not one that crashed loudly against jagged rocks or carved canyons through the earth, but a slow, patient river, the kind that moved quietly through the land as though it had nowhere urgent to be. The kind that reflected the sky so clearly that at dusk it became impossible to tell where the water ended and the heavens began. In the early 1800s, along the gentle bends of this river, in what would one day become part of the American Midwest, there lived a small and scattered community. It wasn't marked on most maps. In fact, many travelers passed nearby without ever realizing it existed. But to the people who lived there, it was the center of the world. The town had no official name at first. Some called it Riverside, others simply the settlement. Over time, though, it would come to be known as Willow Bend, named after the long, sweeping curve of the river and the graceful willow trees that leaned toward the water, their branches drifting like soft curtains in the breeze. Life in Willow Bend moved slowly. Mornings began with the soft glow of sunlight filtering through mist rising from the river. Farmers would wake before the sun fully climbed into the sky, stepping out onto wooden porches that creaked gently under their boots. The air smelled of damp earth, fresh hay, and distant wood smoke. There was no rush. People worked, of course. They planted crops, repaired fences, tended livestock, but everything unfolded at a steady, unhurried pace. Time in Willow Bend didn't feel like something to chase. It felt like something to walk alongside. Among the residents was a man named Elias Carter. Elias was not particularly remarkable at first glance. He was neither the tallest nor the strongest man in town. His voice was soft, and he rarely spoke unless he had something meaningful to say. But there was something about him, something steady, something thoughtful, that made people trust him without quite knowing why. He had arrived in Willow Bend years earlier, traveling alone with a small wagon and a handful of books. No one knew much about where he came from, and he never offered many details. When asked, he would simply smile and say, "From a place not so different from here." Elias built himself a modest cabin near the riverbank, close enough that he could hear the water at night. It was a simple structure, made of hand-cut timber, with a stone chimney and a small window that faced west, catching the golden light of late afternoon. Inside the cabin was quiet and orderly. There were shelves lined with books, more than anyone else in Willow Bend had ever seen in one place. Histories, journals, maps, and worn volumes filled with handwritten notes. Elias spent many evenings reading by candlelight, turning pages slowly as though each word deserved careful attention. But he wasn't just a reader of history. He was, in his own quiet way, a collector of it. Every time someone in town told a story about their journey west, about a storm they had survived, about a place they once called home, Elias would listen closely. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He simply listened, his eyes steady, his expression calm. Later, he would write it all down, not in a hurried way, but carefully, thoughtfully, as though he understood something others did not, that small stories, the ones told casually on porches or beside campfires, were just as important as the grand events recorded in official books. Years passed like this. Seasons came and went, the green fullness of summer, the golden quiet of autumn, the stark stillness of winter, and the gentle return of spring. The river remained constant, flowing as it always had, carrying reflections of clouds, trees, and time itself. Then one evening, something unusual happened. It was late autumn. The air had turned crisp, and the leaves had begun to fall, drifting lazily to the ground in shades of amber and rust. A soft wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of distant rain. Elias was sitting outside his cabin, a notebook resting on his lap, when he noticed a figure approaching along the narrow dirt path that followed the river. The traveler moved slowly, as though weary from a long journey. He was wrapped in a heavy coat, dust clinging to the fabric. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but there was something in the way he walked, steady, deliberate, that suggested determination more than exhaustion. When he reached the edge of Elias's property, he paused. For a moment, neither man spoke. The river continued its quiet movement behind them, and somewhere in the distance a bird called softly before settling into silence. Finally, the traveler lifted his head slightly. "Evenin'," he said, his voice low but clear. Elias nodded, closing his notebook gently. "Evening," he replied. "You've come a long way." The traveler gave a faint smile. "Feels like I've come from another lifetime." There was no urgency in the conversation, no tension, just two people meeting at the edge of a quiet river as the day slowly faded into night. Elias gestured toward the empty chair beside him. "Sit," he said. "Rest a while." The traveler hesitated only briefly before stepping forward and taking the seat. He let out a slow breath, as though he hadn't allowed himself to fully relax in quite some time. For a while, they sat in silence. The sky deepened into shades of blue and violet. The first stars began to appear, faint at first, then brighter as the light of day slipped away. After some time, Elias spoke again. "What brings you here?" The traveler looked out at the river. "Stories," he said. Elias tilted his head slightly. "Stories?" The man nodded. "I've been following them, across towns, across states, wherever they lead." Elias studied him for a moment, then allowed a small, knowing smile to form. "Then you've come to the right place." The traveler turned, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Oh?" Elias rested his hands on the notebook in his lap. "This town," he said quietly, "is full of stories. Most people just don't realize it yet." The wind softened, the river flowed on, and as the night settled gently over Willow Bend, something shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. Because this meeting, quiet as it was, would become one of those stories, one that would be told and retold
long after both men were gone.
Night had fully settled over Willow Bend. The sky was filled with countless stars, scattered gently across the darkness. Their reflections shimmered softly on the surface of the river, creating the illusion of another sky below, quiet, deep, and endless. Elias and the traveler sat side by side. Between them rested a small wooden table, and on it lay Elias's worn notebook. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It carried a kind of peace, like two people understanding each other without needing words. After some time, Elias spoke softly. "You said you were searching for stories." The traveler nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I've been moving from town to town, listening to people. Some stories are big, some are small, but every single one carries a piece of truth." Elias looked at him with quiet interest. "Do you write them down?" The traveler gave a faint smile. "I try to remember them," he said. Then he paused, glancing toward the river. "But you can't hold on to everything." Elias rested his hand gently on his notebook. "That's why I write," he said, "so nothing gets lost." The traveler turned more fully toward him. "You only write about this town?" Elias thought for a moment before answering. "This is where I started," he said, "but I believe every small story connects to something larger." The river's soft movement seemed to carry his words further into the night. The traveler spoke again, more quietly now. "So, this place, is it part of something bigger?" Elias smiled just slightly. "We all are," he said. "Part of a much longer story, one that time keeps telling." A gentle breeze passed through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called out before everything returned to stillness. After a moment, the traveler reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked old. The edges were worn, the color faded with age. He handed it to Elias. "I found this," he said, "in a town a long way from here. An old man gave it to me. He said someone by this river might understand it." Elias took the paper carefully. Slowly, he unfolded it. Inside was a hand-drawn map. It wasn't perfect. Some lines were rough, some details unclear, but there was no mistaking the shape of the river. It curved gently across the page, just like the one flowing beside them. And there, marked with a small circle, was a single point. Elias's eyes settled on it. "That," he said quietly, "that's here." The traveler nodded. "That's what I thought." He hesitated before asking, "But what does it mean?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up slowly. "Come with me," he said. They began walking along the river path. Moonlight stretched across the ground, just enough to guide their steps. Dry leaves shifted softly beneath their feet, barely making a sound. They moved toward the bend in the river, where the willow trees grew thicker, their branches hanging low, brushing against the night air.
This was the oldest part of Willow Bend. Long before the rest of the settlement had taken shape, this was where it had begun. Elias stopped in front of a large willow tree. Its branches curved downward, almost touching the earth. He gestured toward the ground. "This spot," he said quietly. "There used to be something here." The traveler crouched down, looking closer. At first there was nothing unusual, just fallen leaves and soft soil. "What was it?" he asked. Elias answered slowly. "A wooden box." The traveler looked up, surprised. "A box?" he asked. Elias nodded. "Years ago, when I first arrived, an old man showed me this place. He told me there was something buried here, something that had witnessed time itself." The traveler's curiosity deepened. "Did you open it?" Elias shook his head. "No." "Why not?" Elias looked up at the stars. "Because he said," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "only someone who truly understands stories would know when it's time to open it." Silence settled again. The traveler spoke softly. "So you were waiting?" Elias looked back at him. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I knew someone would come." The air felt cooler now. The river continued its quiet flow. The traveler put his hand on the ground. "Should we dig it up?" he asked. Elias was still for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said. They began to clear the ground. Slowly, carefully. Leaves were brushed aside. Soft soil moved beneath their hands, and after a while they felt something solid beneath the surface. Wood. A box. Old, but still intact. Together they lifted it from the earth. In the pale moonlight, it seemed almost untouched by time. Neither of them spoke, because they both understood. This wasn't just an object. It was a doorway into a story. Elias placed his hand gently on the lid. "Do you want to open it?" he asked. The traveler looked at him, then back at the box. His fingers moved slowly toward the latch. And in that moment, the sound of the river seemed to grow just a little louder. The wind stilled. Time itself felt like it paused. The night had grown deeper. Moonlight rested softly on the surface of the river, spreading across it like a quiet memory. A thin layer of mist drifted just above the water, rising slowly, as if the earth itself were breathing. Beneath the willow tree, Elias and the traveler stood in stillness. The old wooden box rested between them. The traveler's hand remained on the latch. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had paused. Neither of them spoke. Then, very gently, Elias said, "Go ahead." There was no urgency in his voice, only quiet certainty. The traveler took a slow breath. His fingers moved, carefully lifting the latch. A faint sound followed, the soft release of aged wood and metal, as though something long sealed was finally letting go. He slowly raised the lid. Inside there was darkness at first. Then the moonlight slipped in, revealing what lay within. There was no gold, no treasure, only papers, old ones, yellowed with time, fragile at the edges. Elias leaned forward slightly, studying them. There was no disappointment in his expression, only a calm understanding. He said, "I thought so," quietly. The traveler reached in and lifted one of the pages, carefully, as if holding it too tightly might cause it to fall apart. He unfolded it and began to read. His voice was low, steady. "Whoever opens this box should remember that history does not live only in great events." He paused briefly, then continued. "It lives in the small lives of people, in their words, their memories, and even in their silence." The traveler fell quiet. The air seemed to grow even stiller. Elias spoke softly. "There's more, isn't there?" The traveler nodded. He picked up another page. "If you've come this far, then you are already part of the story, because searching for stories is another way of finding yourself." Elias closed his eyes for just a moment, as if the words felt familiar, not because he had read them before, but because he had always known them. The traveler continued reading. "The river remembers everything. What you see, what you hear, what you feel, it all remains in some way." He looked up briefly, then finished. "Within time, within people, as stories you cannot always see." Silence followed. Only the river moved, steady, quiet, endless. After a while, the traveler spoke. "Who wrote these?" Elias leaned closer to the box. He reached inside and picked up a smaller piece of paper. There was only a name written on it: Samuel Hayes. The traveler repeated it softly. "Samuel Hayes." Elias nodded. "I knew him," he said. The traveler looked at him surprised. "You did?" Elias's voice remained calm. "He was the old man who showed me this place years ago." A faint ripple moved across the river, catching the moonlight, as if something from the past had quietly stirred. The traveler sat down slowly on the ground. "So he knew someone would come?" he asked. Elias looked out toward the water. Maybe he knew the story would continue. The traveler turned back to the box, going through the rest of its contents. More pages, more handwriting, more voices, different people. One wrote about a long journey, another about a family left behind. Someone else had written about a single ordinary day. Small stories, but each one carried something real, something quiet. Elias lowered himself to the ground beside him. "You see," he said, "this is history." The traveler nodded slowly. There was something different in his expression now, not just curiosity, but understanding. He said, "I always thought history was about big moments, wars, leaders, change." He paused, glancing around at the quiet river, the trees, the night. "But this," he continued, "this feels small and calm and somehow deeper." Elias smiled softly. "Because real history," he said, "doesn't shout, it whispers." The river seemed to agree. The night deepened further, and within that quiet darkness, something unseen began to glow. Understanding, connection, story. The traveler gently closed the box. "What do we do now?" he asked. Elias thought for a moment. Then he answered, "Now we keep it safe, and we add to it." The traveler looked at him. "Add to it?" Elias nodded. Your story, mine, this town's, this river's. The air settled again into that familiar calm. Slowly, both of them stood. Their shadows stretched long beneath the moonlight, and the river kept flowing, holding everything, carrying everything forward.
Stars still lingered in the sky, but along the horizon a faint light had started to appear, the earliest sign of morning. Beneath the willow tree, Elias and the traveler stood in quiet stillness. The wooden box rested between them once more, now closed. But it no longer felt the same. It wasn't just a box anymore. It carried something heavier now, stories, memories, and the quiet presence of time itself. The traveler spoke softly. "What do we do with them?" Elias looked out toward the river. "Somewhere they'll be safe," he said, "but not hidden, not forgotten. Somewhere they can be found again." The traveler thought for a moment. "So we don't bury it again?" Elias shook his head gently. "No," he said, "time changes, and stories find their way." The air had grown cooler with the coming dawn. Somewhere nearby, birds had begun their early calls. A new day was beginning. Elias lifted the box into his hands. "Come on," he said quietly. They started walking back toward the settlement. The darkness of night slowly gave way to soft morning light. The outlines of cabins became clearer. The mist drifted away, revealing the quiet shapes of Willow Bend. The town was waking up, but this morning felt different, because now the stories were no longer buried. They were returning to the light. Elias stopped in front of his small cabin. He opened the door and stepped inside. The familiar calm greeted them, rows of books, the faint scent of old paper and candle wax, and a silence that felt warm rather than empty. He placed the box carefully on the table. The traveler looked around. "You've been doing this all by yourself?" he asked. Elias gave a small, thoughtful smile. "No one is ever alone," he said, "when they carry the stories of others." The traveler nodded slowly. He stepped closer to the table. "My story," he began. "Will you write that too?" Elias looked at him. "Are you ready to tell it?" he asked. The traveler was quiet for a moment. The first light of morning touched his face. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think it's time." Elias opened his notebook. He picked up his pen. "Go ahead," he said. Silence settled into the room once more, but this silence was different. It was waiting. The traveler began to speak. He told of where he had started, the roads he had walked, the towns he had passed through, the people he had met along the way. His voice was calm, but there was depth in it, the kind that comes from distance, from time, from reflection. Elias wrote everything down, slowly, carefully, each word placed with intention. Time seemed to slow again. Hours passed. The sun had fully risen now. Light streamed through the window, filling the room with warmth. At last, the traveler's story came to an end. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elias finished the final line. Then he set the pen down. He looked up.
"Thank you," he said. The traveler seemed slightly surprised. "For what?" Elias closed the notebook gently. "For your story," he said. "It's not just yours anymore. It's part of something larger now." The traveler smiled, a quiet, easy smile. "So," he said, "mind if I stay here for a while?" Elias glanced out the window. The river shimmered in the daylight. "Stories don't rush," he said. "You don't have to either." Outside, birds moved through the air. A soft breeze passed through the trees. Willowbend had returned to its quiet rhythm, but something had changed. Subtly, a new chapter had begun. A box had been opened, and now new stories were being written. The river continued to flow, just as it always had.